Welcome, listeners. We're so happy you joined us today on Autism Awareness Day. I'm your host, Leslie Gunterson, and from Educational Solutions, and my guest here today is Amy Gravino. She has a master's degree. She's a certified autism specialist and the president of Ascot Coaching. Amy offers autism consulting and college coaching services for individuals on the spectrum and professional presentations for conferences, schools, and professional development workshops. Amy has spoken to numerous audiences on various topics, including girls and autism spectrum disorder, growing up on the spectrum, bullying, autism and spectrum disorder and transition, and her specialty is autism and sexuality. Among Amy's professional highlights are speaking on a panel at the United Nations on World Autism Awareness Day in 2011 and giving her first TED Talk at Sexton Hall University in April of 2014. Amy currently serves on the Awareness Committee of Autism Speaks and Self-Advocate Advisory Board for the Daniel Jordan Fiddle Foundation, and as the co-facilitator of the support group of Morris County chapter of ASPEN in New Jersey. Her writing has been published in a variety of outlets, including the textbook Exceptional Children, An Introduction to Special Education, which is one of my textbooks that I use for all of my kiddos. Autism Spectrum Quarterly, also she writes in, the official blog of Autism Speaks, and more. She's now authoring The Naughty Audie, a memoir of her experiences with dating, relationships, and sexuality from first-hand perspective of a woman on the autism spectrum. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you for that terrific introduction. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited that you're here to speak with us and share about your experiences and how you coach people with autism to help them through college. So tell us a little bit about your story, because I think it's so original.
Oh, thank you. Well, as you mentioned, I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at age 10. It was the same year that it was just first added to the DSM-4, so it was kind of a miracle that I was diagnosed at that time, especially being a girl, since boys are diagnosed at a far greater rate than girls. I grew up in a small town on Long Island, New York. I went to public school. I was mainstreamed all through school. There was no inclusion classroom back then, or self-contained classroom back then. There was not anything like that. So I just had to kind of go along as best as I could. I didn't have any early intervention. That wasn't something that my parents and I were aware of. So I did attend some social skills classes, but they had other kids in them who had other problems besides autism, so it wasn't really right for me. I did have a speech pathologist that I saw, and I had a one-to-one aide in high school, but unfortunately that didn't really remedy the issues I was dealing with, which primarily were bullying at the hands of my classmates, pervasive bullying on a daily basis. But I managed to graduate in 2001, and I went off to college at King's College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, where I got a bachelor's degree in English. And then I went to the West Coast and lived in Seattle for 2 years, which is a whole other story unto itself. And I wound up moving back to the East Coast in 2007 to begin graduate school at Colwell University, which is where I got my master's degree in ABA. And I started Ascot Coaching in 2010 because I wanted to work with adolescents and adults on the spectrum, because I think that so much of the services are geared toward young children and early intervention. And I know as an adult on the spectrum myself how there's so much lacking for adults out there. So I really wanted to focus on that. And my passionate area has been autism and sexuality, as you mentioned, which I have been presenting on for the past several years, sometimes with my colleague, Dr. Peter Gerhardt, and sometimes by myself. And I've come to call myself the Dr. Ruth of the autism world, because I'm 5 feet tall and I talk about sex. So that's what I have been doing. And I've just had a lot of great opportunities come my way over the last few years. As you said, I spoke at the United Nations, and then I did my first TED Talk at Seton Hall, and it's just been a lot of great doors have been opening, and there's even more wonderful things happening this year. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to meet you just because you've accomplished so much, and you got diagnosed. I'm sure your parents probably had some wondering when you're 10 years old. How did they were they relieved when you got a diagnosis, or were were there problems with how your parents were coping, or?
Well, they had wondered what was going on. They initially thought that I had hearing problems because I wasn't listening to them when they would tell me to do something. So they had my hearing tested, and that obviously was very good. Being on the spectrum, I have, pretty sensitive hearing. And they kind of bounced around from one referral to another till we ended up at the Child Psychology Department of Stony Brook University on Long Island, which is where I was diagnosed. And I imagine that there was relief to know that there was an explanation, yet my parents had never heard of autism at that point, so they really didn't know much about it, and there wasn't much information for them to get a hold of. And they both reacted in different ways. My mother definitely dove in head first and was, trying to get all the help that she could, getting books. And, I remember going to her room one night and looking at the nightstand and saying, "Mom, why do you have so many books that start with the letter A?" Because they were all about autism. And so she joined the support group on Long Island that she's been on the board of for many years, and really just tried to advocate for me as much as she could. And by contrast, my father, when I received the diagnosis, it made him re-examine his life under a new lens and made him realize that he is on the spectrum too. So he sort of shut down emotionally for a while. He was there in the sense of, driving me to school or driving me to piano lessons, whatever it might be. But emotionally, he became very distant. There was a lot of tension between us, also because that's around when, puberty starts, and then everything just kind of goes to hell from there. So that it was a struggle with my dad, certainly.
Yeah, I think all teenagers have that kind of period where they struggle with a parent when they're going through changes and stuff. But certainly being on the spectrum and having your dad kind of re-examine his life must have been a big, tense situation. But, I just applaud your mom for getting all the help that she could, and for you to go through school in the general ed without any real, because we didn't know then all the supports that we know now. Did you get any sensory OT, occupational therapy, or sensory support?
I did start seeing an occupational therapist when I was around 13 years old, I would say 14 maybe. The best thing that my OT did was introduce me to her daughter, who was 3 years younger than I, and we became friends very quickly. Unfortunately, her daughter didn't go to my school, and her daughter had a younger sister who was 3 years younger than her. So we all, I would go over to their house and play, but they weren't in my school. But I did have this OT, around, I would say, 8th grade or 9th grade, but there was only so much that she could do, truly. But she did try to help me to the best of her ability.
Well, it sounds like having friends is a big thing too. We had on the show a bullying expert, and one of the things he said was the most important for bullying, which is what you went through, and I'm going to ask you about a little bit more, was just having a sense of, maybe not everybody likes me, but I do have friends, I do have supportive family, I do have a place and a belonging at my home and at my school and with people, and that was the biggest thing. So tell me how you got through bullying and how that helped you.
I honestly don't know how I made it, and I've asked myself this because I was suicidal for many years. I did have this. My mother says that I came home from school one day. I guess I must have been in 3rd grade, maybe, or 4th grade, and I said that I felt like killing myself. And I don't remember this at all, but I had these feelings of, it wasn't even that I wanted to die so much as that I just wanted things to be different. And the only way I knew how to make anything different was that. But I look back now, and I know there are so many kids who didn't make it, kids who did take their lives, unfortunately. And sometimes I wonder, why was I the one who made it? And I think that children on the autism spectrum have a strength inside them that is more so than maybe neurotypical folks, because we are forced to kind of, have nerves of steel in some way. Maybe we don't even know that they're there, but they're inside of us, and they're what keeps us going. The thing about bullying too is that it's not just that my classmates would say these things to me. It was that their voices would become the voice inside my head. So I would take what they were saying home with me, and that made it kind of inescapable. So I really, the world, I don't know how I made it through, except that I just had a lot of gumption, and something in me knew that I had to make it, to get to where I am now, so that I could help people who are facing the same struggles that I went through.
Yeah, well, Amy, I applaud you for getting through it and for doing so well with what you've done with your degrees and your master's degree and being, an international well-known speaker. You must have had nerves of steel. And what I hear you saying is that just surviving whatever way you could has made you a better person, though you wouldn't probably wish that on anyone to be treated like
absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know. People ask me, like, when I have wanted it to be different, when I have, and I feel like everything that I went through, it contributed to making me who I am today. So I can't say that I would change anything, because maybe if I changed something, I wouldn't be the same person that I am. But obviously, I hope people on the spectrum can go through a journey of self-discovery and discovering inner strength without having to be horribly bullied every day for 8 years on end. So I hope it can be different for them than it was for me.
Right. And for all the listeners out here, we do, as a parent, understand the struggle of worrying about your spectrum, your child who's on the spectrum being bullied or having those hurt feelings, or that sense of I want to die or even suicidal thoughts. And we just want to acknowledge that and say it's really a bummer. And once you get through it, there is a light on the other end. But we by no means want anyone to have to go through that at all.
No.
So now you're an adult. You're out in the being the Dr. Ruth of autism, talking about sexuality. How has that affected your relationship with your parents? I know, as a mom, I just have questions about that, of course.
Mm-hmm. Well, my parents sometimes accompany me to the conferences that I attend, just so that I have somebody to travel with, so it's more fun than being all by yourself. But if I'm doing a presentation about sexuality, I always tell them, don't come to this one. It's weird. Don't come to this, and and they understand. I mean, I'm open about these things. The day after I lost my virginity, which I did when I was in Seattle, I called my mother on the phone and I told her. I was absolutely happy to tell her. I can't imagine what her reaction must have been on the other end. But, it's so important to be doing what I'm doing, because people are not talking about this topic. People, when it comes to individuals with disabilities, and autism is included in that, of course, and sexuality, people don't want to think that if you are autistic, you have a sexual side to you, or that's something that you even are interested in, especially parents. I know it's hard for parents to think of that, but you have to remember, if you have a 13-year-old kid who's on the spectrum, yes, they're autistic, but they're also 13 years old, and they have all those hormones going through them, and they're going through the same physical changes as their neurotypical peers. So that aspect has to be addressed both on a practical level and on just a humanitarian level, because to deny us the opportunity to engage in meaningful interpersonal relationships is to deny us a vital part of the human experience. So,
absolutely, and I'm so glad you're out there telling people like that, because parents, we need to hear it. We need to be reminded. Our child may be atypical in some ways, but they're very typical, normal in all other ways. My coaching philosophy is people are whole and complete and work perfectly, just the way they are, and we're just all different. And so I'm really glad you're out there doing that work and being so vocal about it, and taking away the taboo and the shame and the questions and the doubts, and just saying it like it was. I think truly, I mean, you say you're Dr. Ruth of this world, but she did a big thing, just taking the taboo and the shame away from sex in regular, life in the time period that she was at. So I just really, right. I'm proud to acknowledge you for that. That's just so awesome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So you speak to lots of different groups, and I was going to. I always ask my speakers for solutions, and I know you work individually, so you may not have any specific solutions for parents, what they can do to help their kids getting through school. But maybe you can share with us things that helped you, or things that have helped some of your clients going through college. Feel free to share sexuality solutions if you want to, or whatever, just things that helped you get through school.
Sure. Well, I would say, in regard to the sexuality piece, because people do ask this, how the heck do I talk to my kid about this? I always tell them you have to get past the blushing cheek phase. Like, you can't be embarrassed by this stuff. Is it easy to talk about? No, of course not. But you have to show your child that you are willing to be there for them to ask questions that they may have, because they could get their information, from their peers, which is really probably not the best source, or from the internet, which is even worse in some ways. So it's important to be that safe space for them. That's something that I was always looking for all throughout my younger years through school. What's that safe space? A safe space isn't necessarily an actual physical location. It's also a person, someone you can fully be yourself around. And I think it's, if you can be the person that your child can really be themselves around and feel safe, and that they can talk to you, that's a huge thing. Conversely, if that's not the case right now, it doesn't make you a bad parent. I don't want anyone to think that, oh, my kid can't talk to me, no. It just means that they're 16 years old, and 99% of 16-year-olds would rather talk to their peers than their parents. That's just how it is. But being that constant presence, I think, is so important, and making sure your child knows that you're not there to judge them. You're there to help them and to accept them. And that goes for other institutions, too. In college, it's the same kind of idea. It's a new environment. It can be very stressful for students on the spectrum. And it's, in college, you have to advocate for yourself. There's no IEP. Things are not in place already, and you don't have to worry about it. You have to actually go to, the disabilities office and tell about yourself and what accommodations you need. You have to be able to articulate your needs. And if you're someone who's never done that before, it can be really hard. And then add to that the social piece on top of that, living in a dorm, eating in a cafeteria, engaging in social activities that one does on a college campus, like clubs or parties or whatever it may be. It's a whole lot of new things that can be really challenging. And so if you can be someone that a person on the spectrum can rely on, at least that they can, come to you with questions, they can talk to you, that is a huge thing. For me, that person was my friend Jen, whom I met in my freshman year of college. As it turned out, which I didn't even realize, we lived on the same floor, and it turned out that she has a brother who has Asperger's, and so she immediately understood me in a way that I didn't have to explain it. She just knew. I always remember the time that we were in a bar, which I'm not a big bar person, and it was this little hole-in-the-wall, crappy bar, and they had a beach theme going on, so they had sand on the floor, and it was really noisy, and it was crowded, so I knelt down, and I started kneading my hand in the sand, because I've always liked to feel things like sand or flowers. It's always been very calming for me as a sensation. And Jen looked down and saw me, and she said, "Oh, Amy's getting overwhelmed." And she knew, and I didn't have to explain, and she didn't think that I was, like, crazy, So it was such a wonderful thing to have someone like that, that I could talk to and really be myself around. But, and as parents, though, of course, it is difficult with college because you have to let go a lot. You are not entitled to the information that you were getting in high school about your kid. The college isn't going to call you if something is going on. You know what I mean? So it's a difficult thing. It's being willing to let your child go into the world. And yes, they might make some mistakes, but that's part of growing. It's, you have to be willing to say, I know that this is a new thing, and I'm not going to hover over you every 2 seconds, because I know that you need to be on your own and learn to live in the world. And I think that's the hardest piece for parents a lot of the time, is letting go. So the fact that my parents
and that's what that's one of the things that I help parents with is creating an independence plan for their kids and for themselves, and letting go and putting the supports in place. So did you have a coach through college?
No, I did not have a coach. I did not have a coach of any kind. I didn't even know coaches were a thing when I was in college. I just sort of bumbled along as best as I could.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the other thing was that I was very proud in some ways. Like, I didn't want to feel like I needed help, so I didn't go to the academic support office, even though maybe there were some times when I should have or I could have if I had really needed to. I had this feeling of, because when people say to you, oh my gosh, I would not have known that you were on the autism spectrum until you said something, you start to feel, I can do this, like I'm smart, I should be able to handle these things. And it gets hard to ask for help because you feel like asking for help is a sign of weakness, or that was the feeling that I had at that age. I know differently now. I would that's another tip that I would give to people, is that do not be afraid or ashamed to ask for help, because it is not a sign of weakness in any way. Asking for help shows that you're having a problem with something and you're doing something about it. So don't be afraid to ask for help.
Right.
So yeah,
and as a coach, but now you are a coach for a number of your clients who are college students, and providing some coaching for them. So they have kind of it's nice for young people to have a middle ground between parents. They're naturally going to separate from their parents and then be independent, but in between they might need some support, and that's where a coach could come in really handy. Do you think that might have helped you a little bit?
I think so. Yeah, I think that really would have, that might have been very beneficial, especially for some of the new social situations that I found myself in that I'd never faced before. I think a coach would have been, pretty useful in that regard. I mean, in the beginning, my parents were calling all the time. This was before I had a cell phone, so they would call my phone in my room, and then one time, I was out. I actually, because I made friends finally when I went to college, and I got back and I called my parents and they said, "Where were you? We were trying to call you." And I said, "Well, Mom, I have friends now," and it was such a new thing, and it was a wonderful thing. But definitely, a coach could help smooth over the rough patches and the challenges with becoming. Because I was only homesick for one night. I did a program at my college in the summer, which was a 2-week program for students with disabilities, to kind of get ready for college. And I was homesick for exactly one night, and then I never looked back. So I wasn't afraid to be away from home, but definitely the new situations that I was dealing with, and the challenges with those, I think a coach would have been helpful for those, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that just brings us into more of the work that you do as a coach. How do you work with some of your clients, or maybe share with us how you work as a coach and what what you do, and how parents parents or students with disabilities can find you and use your services?
Well, I do, because there are, of course, people on the spectrum all across the country. I do Skype coaching as well as in-person coaching. I've done primarily in-person at my office in Fairfield, New Jersey, but I am willing to do online coaching. I do a mixture of coaching and consulting services. I would say I'm often contacted by people whose their child is in high school or is having trouble staying in. They're not in college, but they were in college, so I'm kind of, folks find me when the student maybe isn't yet at the college place, but I do, work as a mentor. I'm very open to helping as a mentor for students on the spectrum who are still looking at college, who may not be at college yet. So, like, the mentoring, I think, is a very helpful thing. I know for me, certainly as a teenager on the spectrum, it would have been hugely helpful to have an adult on the spectrum that I could have spoken to and asked questions like, hey, I'm getting ready for college. I'm a little nervous, or what should I look out for? What's it like? How is it for you? So I think that that's something that can really be useful for students on the spectrum, so just to have an older autistic individual to speak to and really get some good advice from.
Yeah, wonderful. So, Amy, I just want to say thank you for sharing so deeply from yourself and the good work that you do, and being so vulnerable and honest and speaking to these issues the way you do with us and with the way you do with your audiences when you're a speaker. tell us, how can parents contact you to either, talk about a mentoring program, or people contact you to get a speaking engagement to have you come speak to their group?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, you can visit my website at www.amygravino.com, and I can be reached by email most easily at amy@amygravino.com. You can send all your inquiries there. There's plenty of information on my website about hiring me. I have videos of my previous speaking engagements, and I have a brochure for Ascot Coaching for more information about my coaching services and how all of that works. So everything that you're looking for is on my website.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being with us and being the stand for people that you are, and being in contribution to the community of autism spectrum disorders, and to young people, and to being the Dr. Ruth of the autism world. We just appreciate you and who you are and the stand that you are for people, Amy. And I just want to thank you so much for being on our show.
Oh, thank you, Leslie. I really appreciate it. I'm glad for the opportunity to be on the show, and thank you so much.
Yeah, and I definitely have some autism students I'm sending your way for sure. And I hope our listeners have people they want to recommend, get in touch with you and learn more. Thank you so much. And I always tell my guests, it's not goodbye, it's I will see you down the road, because we certainly have more to share.
Absolutely. I will see you down the road. You got it.
Okay. Bye.